Meanwhile, yes, the Republican National Convention is well underway. DNC next week. Here to help us take a look at how things are going so far is Professor Peter Wielhouwer of the Western Michigan University Political Science Department. Welcome back, Peter.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
Great. Thank you for the time again today.
My pleasure.
Boy, this the timing of this chat is pretty good.
Indeed.
Man. So Ted Cruz gets up there and doesn't quite say the words some people wanted to hear.
Yeah, he doesn't quite pull the trigger.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think there are two things going on here. First, I think it's important to remember that Donald Trump ran a really visceral, personal campaign against all of his opponents, and especially the ones who are most prominent. And it just got really, really ugly and personal. And I think that it's hard for anybody to overcome that. And then the other side of it is that people seem to be thinking, some of the political pundits that I've been listening to the last 12 hours or so, are saying that Cruz was trying to position himself for 2020, hoping for a Donald Trump loss. But in general, I think that Cruz is saying, I think we should vote for Republican, but I don't think that Donald Trump is the best representative of what the party ought to be about. And so I think that he just could not bring himself to get over the personal ugliness campaign. And this has been the case, I think, as well for John Kasich, Jeb Bush as well.
Yeah, well, let's remember, none of them are there.
None of them are there. That's right. Now, they've been more quiet. They've been behind the scenes. They haven't really been very public about their opposition, but just their unwillingness to be there speaks to the level of personal animus between Donald Trump and what he created between those guys.
Yeah, what did he call Ted Cruz? I forget.
Lion Ted.
That's it.
Yeah, and he said it over and over and over again, day after day, for months. And then he accused Cruz's father of being involved in the plot to kill JFK. I mean, really just over-the-top stuff. And politics is about relationships, and internal politics of the party is about personal relationships. Donald Trump didn't have that, and he didn't really work to build it.
And so he didn't get the words from Ted Cruz that he was apparently expecting. Now, there were some reports today that had been assured behind the scenes that endorsement was coming.
Well, I think I've heard conflicting reports on that. One is that the other side of that would be that a couple hours beforehand they got Cruz's words from him. They knew that he wasn't going to get the endorsement, and so they kind of gamed it a little bit of kind of whipping up of the New York delegation to boo him. And then Donald Trump, if you were watching it on TV, Donald Trump had his entrance about 3 to 5 minutes before the end of Ted Cruz's speech. Donald Trump comes into the convention hall. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship going on there. I think certainly Donald Trump's understanding about the way television works is certainly to his advantage, at least last night.
Professor Peter Wielhouwer with us this half hour on WBCK. We'll take a break and come right back. Richard Piet Show. Professor Peter Wielhouwer back with us from the Poli-Sci Department at Western. We're talking about the Republican National Convention. So, man, I, just observing this, am trying to figure out if this is the way it is, such that, one candidate calls another candidate a bunch of names, and then when it comes time for an endorsement, the other candidate can't get over it. When does Donald Trump say, okay, I got to dial it back a little bit here?
Well, I think that over the last year we've seen that Donald Trump's brand and his style is simply not to dial it back. He shows the ability occasionally to give speeches that are reasonably good, that are reasonably kind of standard stock speeches, but really his strength and his brand is this off-the-cuff, visceral kind of shooting from the hip approach to things. And I think that it seems unlikely that he's going to try to undo that, because it's worked for him so far. So, at that level, we've got to expect that that's the way he's going to operate. Certainly the criticisms that Ted Cruz is receiving attacks that John Kasich was receiving earlier in the week from not being there reflect this idea that put your big boy undies on and get over it and come get behind the party. And so that there's this tepid level of support. I mean, really goes to what the heart is in terms of how visceral this relationship is.
It's interesting because you presume he's got to dial it back at some point, but he's got a big speech tonight. He's going to set the tone, presumably, with that. Let's say he calls you up. Hey, Peter, I got this big speech tonight. How do I handle it? What would you tell him?
Well, I would say he has to make the case for his own ability to be in the Oval Office. I think that people see, they have an image of him. Probably this is going to be his highest level of non-Republican viewership up to this point in a political context. So I think that he has to make the case that he's better than Hillary Clinton. He has to make the case that he has the competence and the experience to do the job of managing the presidency and the big themes that he's been trying to hit in general in terms of U.S. standing in the world, U.S. foreign policy, domestic security, and so forth. Those seem to be his two big things. And so really trying to make the case to the broad audience that that's what qualifies him compared to Hillary Clinton. So a contrast, but also making that positive case.
And it would seem then that it's possible that there are some people out there who are on the fence about these two. Is that true?
Well, I think that I was thinking about this earlier this morning, actually. I think Hillary Clinton has been around and in the public eye for so long. My sense is that the people's perceptions of her are fairly fixed. You're not going to see, I think, a lot of people change their opinion about Hillary Clinton. I think that in terms of politics, a lot of people don't know Donald Trump's positions, and he hasn't really communicated those in a lot of detail anyway. So I think that there are people who could be sold on Donald Trump, whereas people who cannot be sold on Hillary Clinton, they're pretty much fixed. So I think the difference between the two is you've got about 10% of the public who's undecided between the two candidates. That's a little bit smaller than in previous years, but I think that's the key in terms of these two candidates' ability to sell themselves. I mean,
but 10% could make a big difference one way or another, particularly when the polls are so close.
Well, this is really the case, right? I mean, looking at the Real Clear Politics average, you have just a couple of points advantage of Hillary Clinton in the national level polls. But of course, what matters is what's going on in the swing states, and there are a few states that are on the fence or not predictable yet. That usually are. Georgia, for example, is on the fence. Pennsylvania seems to be on the fence. Ohio seems to be on the fence. Ohio's not the biggest surprise because it goes back and forth. But some states that historically have been pretty stalwart supporters of one party or the other seem to be a little bit more mixed. But I think that we'll see those consolidate here in the next couple of weeks after both conventions are done and both candidates are kind of solidified in the public mind. Then you'll see those numbers be more predictable.
We're talking with Peter Wielhouwer, WMU. We'll come back in a moment and talk a little bit more about what we've seen to be at the RNC, some discontent and some falling in line. And is there a perception we'll see the same thing at the Democratic convention? We'll talk about that coming up shortly. A couple more minutes with Peter Wielhouwer, Western Michigan University professor of political science. We're talking about what else? The election. So there has been seemingly some discontent. The RNC started off with some folks trying to express their lack of willingness to go along with the Trump nomination that was at the beginning. Seemingly they'll make a choice whether they fall in line or not. And the other thing I've noticed, too, is that there are still some stalwart Bernie Sanders fans out there who don't like Hillary, and they're vocal about that. So is there a lot of discontent out there? Is that just perception?
Well, I think that there is some discontent. I do think that within the Republican Party you have this Never Trump movement, and they seem to be staying that party line in terms of Never Trump. But as you pointed out, we still have that on the Democratic side. But let's keep the big picture in mind here. First of all, in terms of the conventions, over time, public attention to the conventions has really decreased. So we have a lot fewer people watching the conventions now in the last couple of elections than we had, say, in the 70s. The other thing is that the press really thrives on finding conflict and publicizing the conflict, because that's how they drive viewership. That's how they drive advertising dollars. And so, it's important to keep in mind that whatever conflicts are there, the press is sure to find it out. Now, that said, I do think that within the Republican and the Democratic parties, there is this conflict. My sense is that the Republican Never Trump movement, I think that they are really, literally a Never Trump movement. I don't think they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Whether the kind of never Hillary kind of idea within the Democratic Party, hardcore Bernie Sanders supporters, my sense is that the vast majority of them, in the end, will probably end up voting for Hillary Clinton. But, it's really possible that we'll see a higher vote for Jill Stein, for example, from the Greens, and a higher vote for Gary Johnson for the Libertarians than we've seen in previous years, because both of these candidates of the major parties are extremely unpopular.
Will that have a big effect on the outcome?
Oh, I think so, and I think that it depends on what happens in the individual states. For example, when we look back at 2000, Ralph Nader's candidacy, the number of votes that he received in some of these swing states made the difference numerically between, if we assume that most of them would have voted for Al Gore might have won those states. And so I think that it could make a difference in some of these key states, especially swing states that go either way, Florida and Ohio and maybe Iowa and Colorado, New Hampshire.
All right, so the Donald makes his big case tonight. It'll be interesting to hear his tone. What does Hillary have to do next week to solidify her position? I mean, it's interesting because, as we've pointed out, she's not necessarily the most likable candidate, no matter what your perceptions are, but there she is. What does she have to do to really get the job done?
Well, I think that she seems to have done a better job in terms of massaging the relationship, working the relationship with Bernie Sanders. There's been a lot of contention on putting together the Democratic platform, and the Sanders camp has gotten a lot of what they asked for in the platform. Bernie Sanders gets a Monday night primetime slot, which gives him relatively high profile in the convention. And so, I think that she probably has already worked this relationship better than Donald Trump, the personal relationship conflict better than Donald Trump has. Mm-hmm. Seems like her differences with the people within her own party are policy-based and record-based, a little bit less personal, although there's certainly some personal animosity going on there as well. So I think she needs to come across next week as really being able to say, we're a more unified party, we have a more positive message, rather than the kind of negative message that the Republicans gave this week, and then move forward. I think probably she has an organizational advantage over the Republicans, thanks to the Obama campaigns from 2008 and 2012.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of this whole email thing? This, you say it, and there's all kinds of reactions out there, but are those inclined to vote for Hillary influenced one way or another by that whole email thing that you can see?
I think that there are some Democrats who are influenced by that, who have negative view of this, but I think that at this point in time, this far into the process, how many people are going to have their opinions changed moving forward about Hillary Clinton based on the email controversy or many of the other controversies? It seems to me that enough people know about it. It's been out there long enough that you're not going to have new people changing their opinions based on this information. So I think that it's had its impact. It's likely to have an impact, but I think it's run its course in terms of changing people's minds.
I saw a video that she did that, she shares with her supporters, and she basically said, you know what? Whenever I'm going for a job, my approval rating is lower than when I have the job. So that proves to you that I'm qualified. Does that make sense?
I don't know if that makes sense. Send me the link to the video, and I'll take a look at it, and I'll see if she makes a coherent argument.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting that, she says they're always after me, and the thing is, when I get the job, they love me. So that's the bottom line. I just thought that was an interesting point that she was making. She is one of those divisive kind of candidates. You mention her, and everybody's got an opinion. But she says, I do the job. So I don't know. It's interesting.
I think when you have candidates who are in the public eye for a long time, people are familiar with them in a general sense, and they're just really well established. I think that I wouldn't necessarily call her divisive, but polarizing.
Yes, maybe that's a better word.
I don't think, because divisive kind of says she intentionally divides people, and I'm not sure that's what she tries to do. But certainly she's got a long enough record that people's opinions on her are largely fixed.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a better word. Well, Peter, we always appreciate your viewpoint, and we'll check in again soon.
Okay, take care and stay cool today.
Yeah, you too. Peter Wielhouwer, professor, WMU Political Science Department.